Hello and welcome back to the Private Client Podcast. Today, I'm delighted to be speaking to the wonderful Heledd Wyn, a partner in the private client team at Shakespeare Martineau. Heledd has had a varied career. After doing a law degree at the University of Bristol, she completed a master's in criminology and criminal justice, followed by her LPC. And after qualifying at Gamlin, has worked at a number of leading law firms, ending up in her current role as a partner at Shakespeare Martineau. So, Heledd, thank you so much for joining us and welcome to the Private Client Podcast.
Thank you for having me. Gosh, it's interesting having your sort of career history read out to you.
Oh, I know. I've had that. It does feel a little odd. Is it? So today is actually the last day of the tax year. Does this have any effect on you at all?
Oh my goodness. Hopefully by now, no.
Good.
Hopefully by now everything's done.
Yeah, we're
But
mostly done as well, as of
yeah,
yesterday. I swear every year I say it's going to be done like weeks and weeks in advance, but it never quite happens.
that's because we work with people who aren't as organized as us. And
Yeah, let's go with that. To be fair, there's a number of people that we work with that just you can't do it earlier. So a lot of people that are bonused in March, so they're waiting for their end of year bonuses to come in. So they can't really do too much about that. And then there's a load of business owners that are waiting to see where their profit is for the year. So there's those groups that you can't do it too much early.
we'll let those off. It's the ones who go, oh yes, I'm going to do something now because I've got round to it, and then realise that they've got round to it and they needs to be done by the 5th of April.
Yeah.
They're
Anyway,
the
that
ones.
aside, so I first came across you, it was a number of years ago. I was at a CII Southwest event and you were doing a talk on, from memory, it was all things to do with trusts. And I remember at the time, and this is years ago, and I hadn't particularly, I don't know why this thought occurred to me. I thought to myself, if I ever do a podcast, I have to get her to come on it. So I'm really pleased to have
Oh, thank you very
managed to
much.
have arranged it. And I remember you giving some quite sort of colorful stories about sort of trusts and when they're not set up correctly. And I didn't actually realize that there's a lot of players in that space that aren't solicitors and aren't regulated, or there's sort of a few sort of nefarious actors.
Yes, yes, it's an interesting space. I think it's one of these trusts are a bit of an anomaly, in that they're very much England and Wales based, focused things we can do. When you tell people outside the UK what trusts are, and it really makes their heads hurt. Um, and but I think they're great because I mean, so obviously the history of why trusts were set up goes back to the Crusades, where you had all these sort of
Wow.
chaps charging off to the mid to the east and going, well, I might come back, I might not, I might be gone for a few years, I might not, and I've left my wife and my infant child at home. I don't want untrustworthy sorts to be managing their finances, so I'm going to get my friend or my neighbor to manage the money. And it is literally, I trust them to look after the money for me while I'm off in the Crusades.
Wow. I didn't know
Uh,
that.
yeah, and it goes back that far. And it literally starts with that kind of like, well, I'm not going to be here, but I've got all this land and money and rental income, from my peasants on my land. I need to make sure that my coffers are still being built up. So obviously, roll on a few hundred years, we are a bit more structured. There's a lot more sort of case law behind it. There's a lot more legislation behind it, do's and don'ts, can and can'ts. But it's one of those things that's oddly only it's a regulated activity that a solicitor can draft a trust and trust deeds. There are many trusts out there. Often, they sort of sit in cabinets and don't sit, people don't think about them because
Yeah.
it's often one of those things like, oh, it's just a bit of paper, but actually it's the consequences of what that trustee says, does, gives the rights to others to do can
Yeah. A
be
lot, a lot, a
really
lot more
interesting.
than a piece of paper. Piece of paper that doesn't have to pay tax and file returns.
That's it. That's it.
Okay, well, I hadn't anticipated going as far back as the Crusades. But let's go back to how did you start? So obviously you studied law, so you decided early on you wanted to be a solicitor.
I
Um,
did.
did you always want to be one?
I did always want to be a solicitor. 8 years of age, quite argumentative. Thought it'd be a great job. And that was the end of that, really. So, did the usual thing, did all the exams, did all the qualifications, got into university. At which point I decided I couldn't imagine anything worse than being a solicitor.
Oh no,
Having,
oh really?
yeah,
I know a lot of
genuinely,
people that went the other way that loved studying it and then maybe didn't love the practicing as much as they love the studying, but
yeah. And I just went, oh, do you know what? No, I don't know. I don't know, like midlife crisis at 20.
that's a thing. Is that a thing?
That's a thing. That's a thing. It's definitely a thing. Crisis of confidence. There we go. Let's go for that. And I just went. I just can't imagine how I'm going to take this such an academic thing out into the real world. And I was fortunate. I had some lecturers
Hmm.
and brilliant lecturers. And it's possibly maybe slightly biased because the sort of law lecturers are teaching something quite dry, including trusts law, as it turns out. And we had
No,
some very
not trust.
trust and landlord. They're the ones.
Yeah.
Um, and I think it's quite hard to picture when you're learning it academically.
Yeah.
And I was really fortunate. I had some very engaging and entertaining lecturers in the sort of doing some criminology work. And I went, well, that's actually quite fun. And so I went, okay, I'm gonna take a gap. I'm gonna take time out. I'm gonna take time out. Because I'm obviously stupid. My gap here was doing a master's in
I was
criminology.
going to say that's not what that's not a
I know.
that's not a
I,
gap year.
that's not an academic gap here.
Yeah, I suppose.
And I was like, I really enjoyed it. I learned so much and it was really engaging. And then I realized, the cold, hard reality was that, actually, probably have to earn a living.
Yeah, we all have that moment.
You have that moment of clarity where you're going, this is nice and all, but student loans gonna need to be paid back at some point. And I went, well, I've got a law degree.
Mm,
I may as well do the LPC
yeah,
because at least I've got it.
yeah.
And so I go to do the LPC,
Mm,
and it clicked. So you're saying like the other way around.
yeah.
For me, it completely clicked.
That's
I'd
interesting. Well,
done,
I suppose the LPC is the more I mean, I've not done one, but is it more vocational than a degree?
yeah,
Is it more practical, I should say?
yeah, completely. And it was land law. I mean, having gone into my land law lecture at one point and going, not sure I get it. You went, oh, which bit? I went, all of it. Actually doing the LPC, and then when I started training, being thrown in to actually being a lawyer, it all just came together. So I had a training contract that was probably you tell sort of new joiners to the profession now what it was like. They were probably utterly horrified, which is, hi, welcome. Here's your room with your fellow trainee. We'll see you in 2 years after we've thrown everything at you.
Wow.
Which was extremely challenging and a very steep learning curve. But I think, I learned an awful lot in a very short space of time. And suddenly being given 28 completions on a Friday because people are moving house, and the bosses are like, well, we've got it to the point where somebody just needs to sit down and do the exchange of contracts and do the completion monies. You're sort of cannon
Yeah.
fodder. You can do it. And I would sit in there with like piles of files, and
God.
I would be exchanging contracts and doing completions. And it was like, oh, it suddenly all these sort of like things about easements and covenants and obscure things that you sit there going actually makes sense when you're buying a house and you realize you need to be able to get from the pavement to the front door.
Yep. Yep.
And it just clicked. And I just went, right, okay, this is actually really interesting. And I was should I say sharing an office with another colleague. And the other beauty of the beauty of my training was that where I was, so trainee solicitors have what we call right of audience.
Mm,
So you can go to up to a certain point in court in front of a judge by yourself.
yeah.
And
As in
again,
just turn up and just say, I want to watch.
no, so turn up and do the advocacy.
Oh, sorry. Okay.
Yeah. So you turn up with clients and you have to make an application to the judge for all sorts of things.
That
I
sounds
did it.
terrifying.
It was utterly terrifying. But my bosses are like, well, how else are you going to learn? Off you go.
Well,
And so I did quite a lot of that. Did quite a lot of litigation advocacy. Because they were, that's what we were there for. I actually really enjoyed it. I have to say. It was a great experience. I mean, you learn
well,
a lot.
well, it would go one way or the other. I think having that kind of intro, you're either going to completely take to it, or really not.
It's complete Marmite. And I then, I then got this opportunity, and they went, oh, so and so's leave, this colleague of ours leaving. Would you like their office and their filing cabinet of files? So I was like, okay, I haven't yet learned to say no to things, probably.
So is this, would this have been conveyance? If you said completion, so is this conveyancing at this point?
That's conveyancing. So I was doing family law. I was doing conveyancing completions. I was doing wills, probate.
Wow.
All sorts, complete mixed bag. And yeah, and then I got given a filing cabinet that was just then private client work, because they said, okay, well, this person was just doing private client work, and would you like their office? And I was like, well, yes, I'd like to get out of a shared room. That'd be quite nice, having these delusions of, I'm going to have my office with my, desk.
Hey, yeah, take it.
So I take it. So I did. So I got this cabinet, and I got this, and it really helpfully, it was on the ground floor of the building, and it meant that I was behind reception, and then people just used to walk in and go, I need legal advice. And my receptionist is like, can you get yourself out here and talk to them? So I suddenly went from having quite a small client base to a huge one. Because I was like, well, okay.
So they were all coming to you first?
Yeah. They never got as far as anybody upstairs. So I'm eternally grateful to my receptionist. Always be nice to your receptionists and secretaries. Yeah, make or break.
Who needs social media? Cool. So you did that. So, and how long were you there?
I was there for so that was Gamblings. That was training. I was there about 2.5-3 years.
Okay. And did you was that the point where because obviously you were doing a lot of stuff you were doing a lot of different areas. Yes. Did you sort of find that you prefer like the private client stuff, or was it just that's the work that came to you?
I found that I was like, okay, this is great. I've got lots of superficial knowledge, and I can probably turn my hand to most things, but I think I need to start deep diving and concentrating on private client. So I moved on to a niche. We did elderly client and agricultural work. Old farmers.
Okay.
That was another baptism of fire, but again, learned an awful lot. And I was fortunate at that point that the boss I was working for was a panel deputy for the Court of Protection, and so got exposed.
What does that mean?
What does that mean? So the Court of Protection is a court that looks after people who've lost capacity and are vulnerable. And if there's nobody who's been nominated to look after their affairs because they haven't made that nomination, then the court can make the decision who's to look after their affairs and finances. And so we got clients who didn't have any family members, or there were problem family members, and we were then involved in trying to sort out this person's affairs in their best interests. And I really fell in love with it. I really fell in love with that sort of vulnerable client work. And again, one of these sort of serendipity moments, I was doing some work for a client, and they came in and they said, so you're doing mum's probate? I said, yeah. So we're just sorting out the money and moving all the money around. They said, we found this little cutting in the newspaper. And I looked at it, and it said, deadline for claims for care fund, NHS funding closes in 3 days. And I looked at it and went, I don't know what this is. And they went, well, we think mum was really poorly and we paid out a lot of money for her care fees. We think that looked, from the article that we've read, that we've just cut out the bottom bit, we think that might be her. And I went, in the spirit of, well, what's the worst that can happen? So we sort of sent in an application and said, okay, we, took the client's details, took all the story, and wrote off to the care board, health board at the time. They keep on changing their names, and didn't think anything more of it. Then we got a phone call and say, oh, there's a hearing next Tuesday. Can you all turn up? And I was, at this point, this is where my advocacy background is quite useful. So I'm like, why don't, I'm quite used to turning up and, saying my piece. So we turned up as family, and there's like 12 people there on a panel, and we're all like, okay, so this is a bit more than we were necessarily expecting. We sat down and sort of, family said their piece, and I said I'm here to support them, and we helped put the application together, and the panel sort of nodded sagely and then turned around and went, yeah, sorry, yes, your mother shouldn't have been paying her care fees, and here's £86,000 back.
Wow. Yeah,
And
serious amount of money.
Well, hang on. We all sort of walked out, looked at each other, and went, "Did that just happen?" And it really triggered that. So again, I was doing this sort of vulnerable client stuff, with the court protection, and I was working on this, and I'm going, "Hang on, this family nearly missed out on £86,000 because we didn't stick our hands in the air and go, by the way, we think that she wasn't assessed correctly."
Yeah. I
And
suppose it's the end of the market. You can just make such an impact.
yeah,
I mean, you can make an impact, I guess, wherever, but you're making an impact with people who really, really could do with that help.
completely, because it's a very stressful time anyway when somebody's going into care with whether whatever the illness is, and to suddenly find and this is where sort of I do legal stuff, and then working with you guys as financial advisors is brilliant, because I can sit there and go, well, actually, if I go and do the advocacy, do the lawyering, tell people, look, you do realize you've not applied the law correctly by assessing this person's care needs properly, and I get money back, I then go, well, I'm done now, or over to you to then manage that money. Or alternatively, if it's a case of, well, we've done everything we can to try and make sure that the money is correctly assessed, or we've made sure that we've exhausted all avenues, I'm really sorry, you are now having to pay for care. That's where financial advice comes in, to make sure that money works for people. But I think I mean, the number of people I talk to, and they go, I'm just completely all at sea. I found myself having conversations, the doctors are just saying, oh, dad's got to get out of hospital. Social services saying, well, you've got to pay for your care. And the care home's going, quick, sign a contract, it's £1,500 a week. And you've got all the emotion going on, plus all this. And
it is
there's no joint of
complicated.
thinking.
It's not designed to be easily accessible to people who don't live and breathe it. And there's even stuff we come across in areas that I work in all the time that I really have to wade through the wording of things to sort of figure it out. And you sort of think to people, how could someone, figure this out on their own? And I think the conclusion is they in a lot of cases they can't.
It is tough. It is tough, and that's the sort of extreme end, if you like, of the care sphere. I mean, I also do the more traditional. I still do the traditional private client, which is sitting down with people and going, right, okay, we've got time on our sides. We want to sit down and get to know you and get to know your affairs and your wishes and feelings and aspirations for your money. And that then's a bit of a discussion about, well, let's put in place your wills that move the money in the right direction. Let's put in place powers of attorney in case you lose capacity. We can then arm people to go and have the right conversations. We can set up trusts if people are sitting there going, well, actually, I'm feeling that I want to pass on wealth, but not necessarily give it away. I'd like to feel I have some control over it, or I've got a vulnerable beneficiary, or lots of reasons why you might want to stick it into trust rather than give it straight to a beneficiary. And we can do that. And it's having the end in mind of, look, being realistic, we all die. And I know I was certainly trained when I was doing private client. What you need to be bothered about is inheritance tax, because inheritance tax is 40% to the government, and 40% to the government's a lot of money. So yeah, absolutely. We look at the inheritance tax planning and we look at all that aspect of how we can mitigate appropriately.
Hmm.
But then I sort of sit there and go, well, hang on, we've also got this twilight zone potential where you might end up in care or
Yeah.
your spouse might end up in care. And that is expensive, no matter which way you look at it. Is care in a home, care at home is expensive. And if you find yourself in that position and the powers that be that you might consider are there to help are not helping or they're not joined up thinking, then there could be an awful lot of money being spent unnecessarily.
Yeah. No, I think you're completely right. So that, and so from, I guess, from that stage career wise, that have you then been specialized in that area ever since sort of
Yeah, so for the
post
last
training?
15 years, I sort of definitely, took that sense of justice. We're all a bit right on, we go, we want to be lawyers because we want to make a difference. And it really has been something that I've been really passionate about because I think, do you know what? If it was my mum, I'd be really cross if they were treated badly.
Yeah.
And if I, with the knowledge I have, if I can help people through that and get the right outcome, I'm going to do it. And it's been lovely to be able to work with families and clients and then go, "Oh, I had no idea. I mean, it's a complete distress purchase.
Yeah.
Um, but to have somebody come back and say, I had, that makes a difference. And to give you another practical example, again, we're working with financial advisors is really crucial to this kind of world. I got a phone call from a financial advisor I know, and he said, you're banging on about, the NHS care funding. And I went, yeah. And he went, I think I've got one for you. And I went, okay, so tell me a little bit more. And the one spouse had been diagnosed with a particularly unpleasant degenerative illness, and they couldn't stay at home. And the outcome was, and this is what, 12 years ago, the outcome was the only care home that was suitable for their needs was £1,600 a week.
Hmm.
And so
That adds up.
spouse, yeah, a spouse who's at home is suddenly going frantic, going, hang on, we've got a house, we've got some savings, we've got pension. That's it. If you slice this down the middle and 50% goes on his care, what on earth am I going to be living on?
Hmm.
Which is why they've gone to the financial advisor. And then he went, hang on. So he said, can you just write a letter? I said, tell you what, let's write a solicitor's letter, shall we? Dear care board, we've got this person with this problem, this illness, this is the background, this is the story. Please, can you undertake an assessment for NHS funding?
Had they not undertaken one
No,
at all?
no.
Hmm.
And the outcome of one letter from me was a letter to the spouse going, yep, we've assessed him, and absolutely everything is paid for by the NHS. So you
Wow.
don't need to worry.
That's colossal. I mean, that is colossal.
It is colossal. And it's that's where that's where the passion is. Like, sit there and go, this poor woman had been absolutely frantic. And until, we between us, we got the right answer. So I said, great, I've got the funding. I can step out.
Hmm.
You, financial advisor, can do what you do with the money to make sure she's got the best life she
Yeah.
can live.
So make sure it lasts and all the rest of it.
All that stuff you guys do.
It's one of the plus side. So, because in some ways what we do is it can be dry in terms of it is a lot about numbers and money and tax and wrappers and all that kind of stuff. But ultimately behind it is people and like very, very much affecting their lives. I mean, just like that example you gave, it has a very real like human impact, and they are very,
Absolutely.
very good days. They don't happen all the time, but you do get moments where it is quite a stark difference between circumstances going one way or another, and it is really satisfying.
Mm.
And the plus side about it being money related, is you can often very easily point to the benefit. Like, so, because you can point to the emotional side, but that's harder, and that's huge, and it's often the biggest thing, but it's hard to quantify. But sometimes when you can actually just point to a number and go, there, that was my involvement, and that's how much a client benefited, that's really satisfying as well.
Yeah. It is, and and that's what people understand. That's the quantifiable bit, isn't it? Because you might sit there and go, well, I'm sitting here banging my drum about social care and NHS funding, and it being it's all wrong. Why should I have to pay for care? Well, that's a whole different political conversation that isn't going anywhere. The reality is somebody has to pay for care.
Yeah.
Whether that's the NHS, the state, or the individual.
It's coming
Chances are
from
it's the
somewhere.
individual. Yeah.
So just to rewind slightly, I think I said something wrong at the start. So I said that the space was unregulated, and I know that there is sort of sales type companies that operate, but is it not right to say that the space is unregulated? It has to be drafted, trusts have to be drafted by solicitors?
Yeah, so this is where it can get interesting. So the rogue companies,
Yeah.
I think the big one that hit the headlines recently, for the last few years, is Universal Wealth, where all these loads of trusts and various of the complicated documents have been set up, and then the managing director of the said company did a bunk, got arrested.
Yeah.
And
why? What were they doing?
what were they doing? That it was mis-selling,
Okay.
and but the documents that had been created by a solicitor.
Okay.
So the nuance is that technically each and individual document that had been created for clients of Universal Wealth were legally valid. Just put them all together and you sort of get this monstrosity of a scenario that does not work for the individuals. So they were being sort of charging a lot of money for people.
So the strategy was off,
Yeah.
even if the documents
Yeah.
in isolation were correct. I get it.
And that's the hard bit where you sit there and go, well, we've got all the components, we just don't know how to put it together. Or and the clients are worried.
So how would that look like? Like what would be how does it go? How does that go wrong? What would be the scenario where it doesn't achieve what a client wants or thinks it's going to?
So people who give away their property into a trust because they're worried, they are worried about inheritance tax.
Yeah.
But they don't have an inheritance tax liability.
Okay. Yeah. That's
because
one.
the Daily Mail is great at telling you, you've got a tax liability, and you sit there and go, well, actually, only 4% of the population's estates pays tax, so 96% of the population hasn't got an AHT problem. So why are you putting assets into a trust to mitigate inheritance tax when you don't have an inheritance tax liability?
Yeah, that's a very straightforward one.
But that's the conversation we then have when people go, well, I need to unpick this. And I go, well, why did you do it? And they go, well, I was really worried about inheritance tax. I said, well, let's go back to basics.
Yeah, let's add it up.
You don't have enough. But I've got quite a lot of money. You have quite a lot of money, but given you're a married couple with children and you own a property and you're under $1 million,
yeah,
you're all right. So let's dig a bit deeper under why you were doing this. What scare tactics were there to make you do this?
And then what are the implications at that point? So their property is now owned by a trust for the benefit of their children, presumably.
Yeah.
And what's the implications for them now that they don't own their property?
Precisely that. They don't own their property, so it is no longer theirs. So
do they have to pay rent?
They could be homeless. So it depends who the trustees are.
Yeah.
If the trustees are, and we have seen it, people who have since absconded to Spain and aren't coming back to this country because, for fear of prosecution. and you can't sell the property because there's nobody to sign the paperwork.
Yeah.
You've got a wasting asset in a trust that trustees have a legal obligation to deal with,
Mm.
but nobody's there to sign the paperwork. The beneficiaries aren't missing out, and the people who like are living or you know perhaps still living in that property can't move, can't downsize, can't be near their children, can't do anything. Um, you know, you said say about horror stories at the beginning. Thing get quite regularly is people ring up and go, "I want to give away my house because I don't want to pay for care." And I go, "Okay, well, fine, but let's
Yeah.
unpick the conversation slightly. Nobody wants to pay for care. We get it, but that's the reality. If you
Mm.
give away your house, then that means that it's no longer yours, to state the blindingly obvious. But that means then who owns it? And we had a terrible scenario where somebody had done this and they'd given it to their son, and son had died without a will, which meant that it went to the wife and minor children. And the parents said, "Oh, well, that wasn't really, that wasn't what we anticipated. Can we
Mm.
please move house?" And no, it belongs
God.
to your grandchildren. We're going to look after it. And they came in and then they were like, "Well, what do we do?" And I went, "Not a lot we can do.
Yeah.
What were you, what were you thinking? What was your thinking at this point? And nobody warned us. So
Jeez.
it's really sad. And it's wrong.
And there are rules, and I can't remember. I think because the talk you did was a few years ago, but aren't there mechanisms whereby local authorities can look at disposed assets and try and claw them back in? Is that
Yeah, so it's called deliberate deprivation.
uh,
If you have somebody who is in need of long-term care, and we've exhausted all the other avenues of where we're going to get money from, so they're not eligible for NHS funding, and there is no money other than you know themselves, their assets, and then they knock on the door of the local authority. The local authority then does a means test, does a financial assessment, and then goes,
mm,
"Well, hang on, you're living in a house. Oh, I don't. It doesn't belong to me. I gave it to my son." Well, when did you give it to your son? Were you in contemplation of care at that point? So, did you have an illness that was degenerative? So, dementia is a classic. Somebody might be diagnosed with dementia and they're fine for a while, but we know it's going to be a deteriorating illness. Um, there's probably a reasonable contemplation that you're going to need care at some point with that kind of illness. So the local authority can look at, well, hang on, when were you diagnosed? When did you first start having care provision? And that could be like, going to a respite day centre. That could be having people coming into the house a couple of times a week. Well, you knew you needed care. So why did you then, after those scenarios, start giving away your assets?
mm.
And they can then claw back that money from the recipient. So if money's been given to a child, they can go and seek to recover that.
Is there a
Um,
time limit on that?
no, and this is things people often sit there and go, "Oh, I can give it away in 7 years can elapse," and we go, "No,
Yeah.
that's inheritance tax."
Yeah.
There's no time limit on care
That's
because
right.
it's all
Because
to do with
obviously
the
lots of people
diagnosis.
gifting is, that's one of the go-to, it's one of the first things you sort of look at in some ways,
Yeah,
when it comes to mitigating IHT. And that is a long-term thing because of the 7-year rule. Um, although there is actually the interesting circumstance where it can be 14 years when trusts are
yeah.
involved as well. But that's a bigger topic.
That's another topic for another that
Yeah.
so but the headline one, isn't it, is 7 years. That's the
Yeah.
one that people get stuck on, isn't it? And but actually no, if you've been you know if you've got a degenerative illness but you've been managing for the last 10 years and suddenly there's an intervening period where you now need care, then yeah, the local authority can, in theory, look back. Now, whether they will or won't,
Yeah.
every case will be different. But I think for me, inheritance tax and care fee funding are two sides of the same coin.
Yeah.
And you go, okay, well, inheritance tax won't bother me because I'll be dead, but my cares will bother me. So let's look at that. And I think, one of the things I really like, say, working with financial advisors is going, can we do some cash flow modeling
Yeah.
to go, how much money have you got? What is the lifestyle you want? And
Yeah.
what can we play with over and above the accepted lifestyle?
Yeah. We talk about that a lot. So one of the things, I mean, people vary on IHT. Some clients are so super keen to mitigate every penny of it, and others are more flexible. But what we often say is IHT and mitigation, it is important, but it is secondary to making sure you have enough money to live the way you want to live
Completely.
until you don't need it anymore. And we do try and prioritize it. We do put it to them in that order. So yes, it's important, but you are too, and you've worked a long time for this money, so it's ultimately for your later life needs. And it's difficult. You have to strike a balance because ultimately everyone will die, but we don't know when. And there could be huge time differentials. And in hindsight, once people pass away, you know exactly how much you should have given or mitigated, but you don't know in advance.
Yeah, it's that. It's the unknown unknown, isn't it?
Yeah.
We don't have this Logan's Run type scenario where we're all going to get bumped off at 30, 35. Um, it is that, and I think ultimately it's early planning. It's early conversations. It's
Yeah.
open and frank discussions with individuals and their families. As you say, people's concern about inheritance tax. I certainly had a client once, and I said, "Oh, yeah, you've got quite a big tax bill. What should we do to mitigate it? Because that's what we were thinking." And he went, "I don't want to." I went, "Pardon?" He said, "Well, I'm a doctor." He said, "The NHS has trained me. The NHS has paid me,
Yeah.
and I'm happy to give money back to the NHS."
Yeah. I've
Oh,
seen that as
okay.
well, where they're quite comfortable with it. Yeah, I've seen that. It's funny. People do vary quite a lot.
Yeah.
I think it also slightly depends on to the extent their children are set up or not.
Yeah.
There's like a few different factors and stuff. But so okay, for any sort of financial advisors that might be listening, or investment managers, or anyone in the private client space not doing what you do, at what point with clients should we be pulling you guys in? Should we be thinking this, there's that sort of a flag or a light bulb to think, right, we need to bring in sort of a private client solicitor to look at
Yeah.
this.
I think anybody, when I say financial advisors, I mean anybody who's doing anything with money. So I'm just,
Yeah.
because I don't do money. I don't,
Yeah.
I absolutely don't touch it. Whether once the trusts are set up and everything, we don't touch it. So anybody who's wealth managers, anything in that space, when to get us involved, I think red flag conversations are getting a bit frail, getting a bit forgetful, being
Yeah.
diagnosed with something. Um, Children are vulnerable going through a divorce.
Yeah.
Maybe they've got learning disabilities, learning difficulties. Maybe they've got other sorts of vulnerabilities. Um, worried about their own ability to manage their finances. At any point where things might get a bit fractious,
Mm.
ask, because it's what we can do is we can hopefully consult, work with, put together that strategy. I think absolutely, I really like that phrase. That sort of actually what we do is pull together lots of bits of paper to give a strategy,
Mm.
but rather than just blanket, here's some trusts, here's some powers of attorney, here's some wills, off you go. It's actually what works for you in your circumstances and your scenario and your family, and getting to know them. Getting to know what their pinch points are, what their concerns are. I think that's really important. And I get it. We're solicitors. People don't want to talk to solicitors.
That's not true for me. I love solicitors. I set up a whole networking group so I can meet solicitors.
There
So
you go. But it can be quite intimidating. So talking to some clients this morning, I said, "Oh, how are you?" They're very nervous. I went, please don't be."
Yeah.
um, it's that point at which actually can we foresee that there's going to be a bit of a sticky wicket coming down the line because of individual circumstances? Yes. Let's just have a chat. Is there anything that we can do either now, or either do as in put in place, or go, well, actually what you need to do is this, this and this, and once you've done that and you've achieved it, come back. So
Mm.
sometimes giving clients a list of things to do can be just as helpful as actually sitting down and doing the drafting of the wills, powers, attorney, trusts, doing the advocacy. It's the planning versus crisis management
Yeah.
sphere, as I always say. Crisis management is no fun for anybody
No.
because it's distressing and it's a distress purchase and it makes a sad situation more stressful. The planning side, that's where it's better for everybody because the conversations have been had, that understanding has been had. So I think a really good example is when you're setting up a power of attorney,
Mm.
is going, okay, well, we're going to set up a power of attorney. Great. So your kids are going to have power of attorney. Fantastic. Good. Box ticked. We know that there's continuity of service if you lose capacity. But what does that job look like if they have to step up and do it? Do they understand their responsibilities? Do they understand who we are as trusted advisors?
Yeah.
Let's take it that step further and go, look, you are taking on a job, you are taking on responsibilities, but we're here to help. So I was talking to somebody yesterday. They went, I've never heard somebody referred to you as a holistic solicitor. What does
Yeah.
that mean? And I went, it just means I sit down and probably think wider than bits of paper
Yeah.
and pull in as many people as I can to give the best service to somebody.
Yeah.
Whether from and there's a person I was talking to yesterday is a travel agent who specialises in booking holidays for people with disabilities.
Yeah.
Because and I was like, I never knew you existed, but that's really interesting.
Yeah. I mean, the holistic thing, I mean, and it comes it's sort of within our territory to think a little bit like that, especially because our client relationships are ongoing rather than sort of one-off. But like even tweaks to what we do, like a few years ago, we just emphasized certain questions that were out of our remit on our client fact find, like, do you have a will? Do you have a power of attorney?
Mm.
If you go back a certain amount of years, we just didn't ask about that, but it's so important, it's so crucial. And even though it's not our area, it's good to flag it and point clients in the direction to just put it in place like long before it's maybe actually needed, just to, as you just said, avoid the crisis by a bit of planning and forethought up front.
Completely. And I think, we're all getting better at it. We are getting better at that actually. As bizarre as it might sound, doing less, going, actually, I know where my lane is and I know when I need to pass it on to someone else to actually give that best advice.
Mm.
Ironically saying when I was at the beginning of my career, I did a bit of everything. It's useful groundwork, but actually I couldn't and wouldn't do it now.
No.
I would go, that's not for me. I'm not the best person for this and for your particular requirements. So I'm going to bring in an appropriate third party.
Yeah, who just does it day in, day out.
Yeah.
Yeah, it makes sense. Quick one off the private client side of things. Is there anything that you think that people outside of what you do, is there anything that we don't know that you wish people knew, were more aware of, if you had to pick something?
Oh my goodness.
You're like, where do I start?
Where do I start? Um, we're on your side.
Yeah, that's a
With
good one.
we're here to help. We might ask awkward questions. We might act as a bit of a lightning rod to say, well, I don't have, I'm not in your family dynamic, but so I can poke holes in that just to get you to think about it. But ultimately, if you're my client, I've got your back because that's what
Yeah.
I'm here for. I'm not here to be adversarial with you as a client.
Yeah.
I might be adversarial on your behalf.
Yeah, it's in some ways it's obvious, but it's such a good point. And I think with maybe some of the professions that aren't, maybe they weren't historically as approachable as they could be, that maybe is something that we do need to say a little bit more loudly.
Yeah, and I think gone gone are the days of us all sitting around in sort of pinstripe suits, although I do still own one. Um, we are human, we are approachable, we are trying to do the right thing for our clients, and I think otherwise we wouldn't do it. You know, I'm sure I could find something else.
I've got
Less.
there's one other thing I wanted to ask. And this is for, I guess, any solicitors or junior solicitors listening. The progression to partner. Any advice for sort of younger solicitors sort of coming up through the ranks and sort of with that ambition?
Yes. Say yes.
Yeah,
And how can I help you with that? You will never be turned away if you turn up to somebody who's more senior and going, what can I help you with?
yeah.
Because there will always be 101 things that are just off to the side that do need doing, and if they were just done, would just be brilliant if that just could be taken off. And it might be something that's outside your comfort zone, but if you're willing to have a go, then you will A, learn by having a go, and B, you're never going to get told off for wanting to learn. I think it's not being scared to stick your hand in the air and going, I'll help.
It's a really good bit of advice, and I used to work. I used to work at an investment bank, and someone told me something very similar once. They were taught it was something about career progression, and they basically said, "What can you do to make your boss's life easier?" And do that thing. And
Yeah,
they're like, "It is like if you ever wanted to stand, it's sort of a variation on what you just said, but talk if you want to stand out, I mean,
yeah,
that is a good way to do. That is a good way to do it.
absolutely. I have probably got 101 headaches at the moment.
Yeah,
Please just take one of them off my plate.
yeah, yeah. I could definitely relate to that. Awesome. I think that's a really good place to end it. So thank you so much for joining us. I really
You're very welcome.
really appreciate it. And hopefully see you at the next event. Our
Yeah,
next
and
events are coming up in the summer. So yeah, hopefully
great.
see you at one of
Thank you very
those.
much.
And
All
see you
right.
soon.
Okay, bye bye.